This NFL Week 5 Player Props edition of the Propcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Sign up with promo code MACHINE to score up to $1,000 in bonus cash and get a 50% deposit bonus. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Get your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/rhythm. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/RITHMM. Welcome, everyone, to the Propcast, part of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Here to get into our NFL Week 5 player props for the Sunday games coming off of Thursday night football. We'll recap that here in a minute, but you guys know how we do it here. Give you 3 play props each. We'll talk about our honorable mentions, our touchdown scores as well, and then we'll wrap it up with a best bet for the episode here. But joining me here to help me break everything down for NFL Week 5 for the Sunday games, I got my guy here with me. It's ChrisBeCappinn. Chris, what's going on, my man? How you doing?
What's up, I'm doing pretty good. I'll be doing better if Kirk Cousins didn't, looking like Superman and turned into Peyton Manning last night when I gave out, the best bet on his under 1.5 passing touchdowns. But excited to have another week of football. We got an early game tomorrow as well. So it'd be football all day long. I know it's typically all day long, but it's really all day long when you got those early games in a different country. So excited to break down the props with you, and hopefully we can find some winners, man.
Yeah, 6:30 a.m. Pacific start time on Sunday for the NFL Week 5 Sunday games, with a game between the Minnesota Vikings and the New York Jets. We'll quickly recap what we saw on Thursday Night Football. Probably the most exciting game as far as Thursday Night Football goes early in the season here. 36-30 victory for the Atlanta Falcons in overtime. And like Chris alluded to, Kirk Cousins turning back the clock of time for himself, throwing for 500 yards last night. Did Kirk Cousins, setting the franchise record for the Atlanta Falcons, which was funny because they had put Matt Ryan into the Ring of Honor there for the Atlanta Falcons, and he was a record holder for 500. I think it was like 504 yards or something of that nature. And then on that night, Kirk Cousins goes out and does it and breaks his record. But we mentioned this on the Thursday night football pod that we did for our player props, that I thought this was going to be more of a game that was going to be a little bit more boring. Not boring, but maybe, a little bit more defensive oriented.
Just conservative on the offensive end.
Yeah. A little, because it was a division game, right? And I think it was a big game, obviously, for both teams. 3 teams in this division right now just going to be competing, I think, wire to wire for that division title between the Bucs, the Saints, and the Falcons there. So a big victory for the Falcons there, get themselves above 500. But yeah, look, the story last night was out of the gate. It just looked like this was going to be turned into a barn burner, and it did exactly that. Like we mentioned, Kirk Cousins had a great night. All the player props that maybe for receivers went over. I know I gave out Tyler Algier to go over his rushing yards. I don't think he got close to that. We talked about Kirk Cousins under 1.5 passing touchdowns. That was out the window within the first half. So a little bit, not a great start to a week 5 there, but at least the game was entertaining for us to watch there, Chris.
Yeah, it was an entertaining game. I actually turned it off, right when the Falcons punted the ball back to the Bucs. When the Bucs punted the ball back to the Falcons with less than 3 minutes left, and I woke up this morning and said, "What? 36-30?" And I had to go back and watch what happened in overtime to see Kirk Cousins throw another, game-winning touchdown pass. But yeah, that was super exciting. I'm upset with myself that I did turn it off, but in all honesty, I turned it off. I said it's too. It was less than a minute. I think less than 2 minutes left, and they had punted the ball away. And I was like, yeah, it's over. I don't have enough timeouts. They'll nail on it, and lo and behold, come from behind win for Atlanta last night, third straight home game for them. I think I talked about, but didn't get to the window, discussed it with you on Rachaad White over on his receiving yards. I think that was a loser.
Yeah.
And I did have Bucky Irvin. He fumbled late in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
But while he fumbled, he did go over on his yards rushing with that carry. So that was a winner for me. So 1-1, but best bet loser. So that doesn't feel good. And then also, like I talked about, not liking Kirk Cousins throw a bunch of touchdowns, but if he was going to throw one, it was going to be to Drake London. Of course, that was the first touchdown of the game. So overall, it wasn't too bad of a night, but I just don't like, placing or giving out best bet losers. So hopefully we can do a little bit better here,
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much the same story for me as well. I know we mentioned Young Hoku for the kicker for the Falcons for his points to go over. That one did get to the window as well. I know he had uncharacteristically missed 2 field goals, but still was able to knock down the game-tying one. And then a couple of their field goals along with some extra points. I got him over his points prop yesterday. So, we'll salvage what we can from Thursday Night Football and flip the page here and turn to the Sunday games in the NFL. But before we do that, want to take a quick second here. We have a lot of fun here on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're also we're for the people, and Hurricane Helene has been devastating to the people of Western North Carolina. SGPN, we're teaming up with a local charity, mountainprojects.org, to help give back. The biggest donation will get a guest spot on the College Football Picks show and a ton of great gear from the Sports Gambling Podcast merch store. So, whatever you can, help out the people of Western North Carolina. Just go to mountainprojects.org, hit that flood support button, help out with whatever you can. It'll mean a whole heck of a lot for not only the people in the Western North Carolina region, but also here at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. And speaking of SGPN, we have the most DGen pregame shows in the world. Saturday, the College Experience YouTube is live starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, followed by Sunday, NFL, the Propcast here, of course, kicks off at 11 a.m. Eastern on Sunday. And then after our show's done, Sean and Kramer go live for their show at noon Eastern before the football games kick off on Sunday. So make sure you guys tune in to get all your last-second bets, your DGen parlays, and we also take your calls and much more over on the pregame shows that happen between Saturday and Sunday. All right, let's turn the page here. Let's get into the Sunday games here for the player props. Let's get into it first with our quarterback props. I'll let you lead off here, man. What do you got?
All right, so we're going division matchup, spicy, juicy division matchup here. We're looking at the Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm going with Lamar. I'm taking his rushing prop, though, here. I'm going up and over the 53.5 rushing yards for Lamar. So you look at Lamar this season, if he has utilized his legs a ton, rushing the ball over 50, the over 53 yards, he's over in 3 of his 4 games so far. And, I also went back and took a look at, just his history, against the Cincinnati Bengals team. Last year, he played them twice, 9 attempts for 54 yards, 12 attempts for 54 yards. So right on this number, like right on it, right? But then you go back a couple, even 2 years ago, 12 for 54, 12 for 58, and then 12 for 88. So you could say he's 4-0 to the over in his last 4 games. And I'm kind of the mindset here, from a game script perspective, that Cincinnati is going to load the box. You do some deep digging, you can find out that Cincinnati is returning a few of their defensive linemen, and I think this defense is going to be a little bit better against the rush. I'm not sure how good against the rush, but I do think that they're going to probably load the box to try to slow down Derrick Henry. We know he's been on an absolute tear, been an absolute monster recently, but they still don't have DJ Reader back there. And we talked about his impact. The listeners are probably tired of hearing that reference, but no DJ Reader. This team has really, really struggled against the run. They rank 25th in yards allowed on the ground. 33 rushing attempts per contest is also bottom 5. So for that reason, I think that you load the box and that, you want a Lamar. If you're Cincinnati, you want Lamar to have to beat you with his arm. However, that'll open up, if they can slow down Derrick Henry, that'll open up Lamar for some dropbacks. That's when the opportunity will come for him to have, 60 plus rushing yards in this game, So I play Lamar up and over 53.5, a little bit of juice at -114, but not anything too crazy. I'll go Lamar up and over 53.5 rushing yards here.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Lamar throughout, not this season, but throughout the history of the Propcast, and he's just been very, very profitable when it comes to his rushing yards to go over. In particular, I think in division games here as well, right? You nailed out the numbers that what he's done against Cincinnati here as well, and I think that we thought there was going to be some type of shift for this Baltimore Ravens offense when they changed offensive coordinators, but it's really been that they've stayed true to who they are, and that's running the football, whether it's been with the variation of running backs that they've had in the past, or now this season with Derrick Henry, like you mentioned, back-to-back weeks. He's had an absolute monster weeks for the Ravens rushing attack, and also Lamar Jackson doing his part as well on the ground there as well. So I think that continues here, which is going to be a big division game here for honestly both these teams, especially if the Bengals, want to salvage their season. Hopefully they can get to 2 wins in a row, at least get back to 2-3, and then try to make their climb back to 500, and we'll see what happens at that point. I'll try to play a prop in this game and for the quarterback, and I'll go with the other side. I'm going to go with Joe Burrow. I'm going to go over 252 passing yards in this game for Joe Burrow. And, we talked a lot about how bad the Bengals rush defense is. Well, the Ravens rush defense is one of the best in the league, right? They're allowing the least rushing yards per game. They're allowing the least yards per carry in the game as well, which kind of just tells me that it's going to have to be on the shoulders of Joe Burrow to throw the football here for the Cincinnati Bengals. And you take a look at, as great as this rushing defense has been for the Ravens, the area that they have struggled in has been at that quarterback position, allowing yards, to go over for the opposition here. So we take a look at least thus far this season, the Ravens defense is allowing 282 passing yards per game on an average of 24 completions and 37 pass attempts. I was trying to get there with the completions, Chris, but that number is right. I think it's at 24.5 right now, 23.5, 24.5. So I didn't like it at that number. But then if you take a look at the passing yards, which I feel like is a little bit conservative here for Joe Burrow, it feels like he's finding his stride again here for this team. I know he didn't play a lot in the preseason. A lot of people thought that he was probably still dealing with that, the wrist injury, but also getting T. Higgins back. I think that's been beneficial to this offense, just having another weapon out there for the Cincinnati Bengals. So I think it's a game where Joe Burrow has a really good game. I would not be surprised, Chris, if they do end up winning this game outright due to the Cincinnati Bengals, because again, it is a big game for them. Division home dogs has always been a profitable angle. But I do think it's going to have to be on the shoulders of Joe Burrow here. So best number right now I do see is 251.5. I'll take the up and over for Joe Burrow in this game here, Chris.
Yeah, you mentioned him enough. Pretty much season on the line, especially when you're talking about divisional play and you kind of limping into these, and into not limping into, but you're coming into this one, not playing your best football. The only pushback I'll give you, because I do think it's a game that we kind of talked about this, I think 2 weeks ago, when we talked about Dak Prescott, playing against this Baltimore defense and them having to pass the ball a lot in that game as well. So it's no way I can talk you off of it. I just think just looking at the recent opponents for this Cincinnati team, they are coming off 2 cupcake defenses in the Washington Commanders and the Carolina Panthers. So that's the only thing that gives me a little cause for concern. But you're gonna need all of it, and I do expect Joe to step up and play, probably the best game of the season. He played pretty well against Kansas City in that game that was, they ended up losing. But yeah, he's in a groove. Got his weapon back in Higgins, and we see what Jamar Chase is doing. It makes a ton of sense, I think it's gonna be. I'll talk about this when we get to the honorable mentions, but I got a player prop, honorable mention player prop that I'll talk about in this game, because I do think it'll be a one-dimensional game for the Cincinnati Bengals, and it'll be, Joe Burrow. So maybe even potential, completions, not completions, because I know you mentioned that, but attempts, pass attempts to go over as well. So yeah, I like this one. I like Joe up and over. You said, what was the number on his passing yards?
251.5 is the number right now.
251.5. Yeah, I like it. 251.5 for Joe, up and over. I like it.
Yeah, the pass attempts is at 35.5. I think that's definitely doable. But I think the one that did give me pause for Joe Burrow was the completions. That number was set at 24.5 at plus 105. So I think even the books are really expecting Joe Burrow to fling the ball here against the Baltimore Ravens. All right, Chris, before we get to our next round of player props here, let me tell everyone about our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Pick'em has one of the biggest menus for all sports: NFL, college football, MLB, MMA, WNBA, NASCAR, and more. Their lobby is jam-packed with profit boosts. You can now use specials and boosts on all flex entries. I'm going to put in that Lamar Jackson higher on his rushing yards for my entry this week. So you can sign up as well, play along with us. But make sure you use that promo code MACHINE to claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. That's underdogfantasy.com. Make sure you guys use our promo code MACHINE. All right, Chris, let's get over to our running back props here for NFL Week 5. What do you got?
So we're gonna catch this one early in the morning, because we're going to the London game, and I'm looking at Breece Hall. I think so I got both of these written down, but I think I'm gonna play the rush attempts under over the yards to go under. So the rushing yards for Breece Hall is 51.5, but the attempts are 13.5. So I think I like the attempts a little bit more, and we'll go attempts here. So you look at this Minnesota defense. You just talked about Baltimore being a top 2, top 3 rush defense in the NFL. Minnesota is right with them in that category. I mean, this is a team that's given up just 19.8 rush attempts per game, which is the second most in the NFL. Just 3.8 yards per pop, which is third in the NFL, and only giving up 75 yards per contest, which is right behind Baltimore, the number 2 in that department as well. You just don't expect to be able to run the ball against Minnesota. I checked the weather. I think it's like a 40% chance of precipitation, which, you do with that information what you want. But this is a really good defense, And although Breece Hall has gone over, the rushing yards in 3 of his 4 games, I just don't see the attempts here. I think, looking back through the game logs for the running backs that's faced this Minnesota defense so far, only one running back of the 12 that they faced actually has 11 rush attempts. So if I can get, some insurance on a 14, then I think that makes a lot of sense. You look at the Jets, they're passing the ball at the 9th highest rate so far this season throughout the first 4 weeks, and they're running the ball at a bottom 10 rate so far as well. And I think this is a game where they probably end up abandoning the rush. I think, if you're anybody, Robert Saleh, or, anybody on that defensive staff, you got to go back and look at what, Matt LaFleur and that defensive, unit was able to do, or offensive unit was able to do last week when Minnesota got a big lead against Green Bay. And what they did, was they just kind of kept them on their toes in the second half. They got some explosive plays through the air, but none of that came through the ground, to get themselves back into that game. And I'm thinking that we see something similar. Not that, Minnesota will have a, jump out to a big lead against the Jets, but that wouldn't surprise me. This team is 4-0 straight up and against the spread. All wins is dogs, and they've covered. I think they're the only team in the NFL that has covered every single first half as well. So they're hitting first in most of these games, and that could be another way that Breece Hall stays under on his rush attempts here. I just don't see him running the ball 14, 15 times just because rushing games have been so inefficient against this Minnesota Vikings defense. So I'll go Breece Hall under 13.5 rush attempts, minus 119 over on Caesars is the best number that I see currently.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because we've seen what the Vikings have done to other teams over the first 4 weeks and just really put them in situations where they have to abandon the run. And they've been very good on the offensive side, led by Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson. Aaron Jones has been in that conversation. We've talked about him as well. So I think, again, with his Jets, last week, this Jets, I know maybe the weather had something to do with it last week there as well. But the Jets offense is just looking like a shell of themselves. And Rodgers has just not been able to get on the same page with his wide receivers. And again, if they do start trailing again by multiple possessions, like you mentioned, Chris, that they're going to have to abandon the run. And I think Breece Hall also had a very slow start to the season as well. So, yeah, I really couldn't talk you off of this one just because of the way, how dominating the Vikings have been. And I think it's really telling because their last 3 opponents, it was against the 49ers. They took care of business against the Texans and the Packers. We saw what they did last week. They got out to a 28-0 lead. Did the Packers and did the Vikings, and that put Packers in a in a passing situation for the rest of the game there, and they had to abandon the run. So that's kind of been their MO this season here, or thus far this season, I should say, for the Minnesota Vikings here. So this will be a good test for this Minnesota Vikings team, being across the pond On a neutral side going up against Aaron Rodgers and this Jets team. So, yeah, I do like this one. I mean, the numbers are really backing it up here for the for Brees Hall to go under on his pass attempts. All right, for my next player prop, I'm gonna go over to the. So there's a couple ways that I wanted to go with this. I think it's gonna be Travis Etienne to go over his rushing yards number. That number is set at 51 and a half for Travis Etienne in this game. I know Tank Bigsby has been in that rotation there as far as the running back room does go for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are currently sitting at 0-4. But I think that I want to say Tank Bigsby is on the injury report, and I think we'll get more of an indication if he's going to be able to play or not on Friday when they do go through their walkthroughs and we get those injury reports for the Sunday games here. I'm trying to see if I can find it here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But we've talked a lot about this Colts rush defense or lack thereof and how bad they've been for this thus far this season. So Tank Bigsby right now dealing with a shoulder injury. He has been a limited participant in Wednesday and Thursday. And his status is still up in the air. Same thing with Travis Etienne, but the indications are that he is going to be playing this game. But I talked about Najee last week. Didn't have a great week, but Cordell Patterson, prior to his injury, was starting to really find those gaps in that rush defense for the Indianapolis Colts. And we know, and if you don't know, I should say, the history of the Jags and the Colts, the Jacksonville Jaguars absolutely just own the Indianapolis Colts under the Trevor Lawrence era as well. They've been very, very good. I think 5-1 against the spread are the Jaguars. I believe they're undefeated. Are the Jaguars against the Colts in those 6 games there. But again, we talk about this Colts rush defense or lack thereof. I know they've been better over the last 2 weeks, but I think this is an opportunity for Travis Etienne to really get going here against this Colts rush defense, right? We talked about the first 2 weeks, gave up 150 plus rushing yards to the opposition. Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs. We talked about the Bears rushing attack hasn't really been there. I know we saw DeAndre Swift finally have a big game for the Bears last week. And then, we talked about it with the Steelers that Cordell Patterson had 6 rush attempts for 43 yards before he had to leave the game. And then Najee Harris just for whatever reason wasn't able to get it going here. But Travis Etienne, I think this is a game where he has to step up. Again, obviously, you're in a situation where 0-4. There's been a lot of discussion if Doug Peterson has lost the locker room there for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and maybe is there the possibility that he may be out the door here sooner rather than later. Their conversations are starting to pop up. How do you get rid of those conversations, right? You have to win a football game here. I think this is a good opportunity here for the Colts. And you take a look at what Etienne has done over the first 4 weeks, right? Against the Miami Dolphins, 12 of 44, 13 of 52 against the Browns, 11 of 68 against the Buffalo Bills. And then last week against the Texans, he did have 11 attempts for 50 yards, but Tank Bigsby was really that guy last week for this team. I'm not sure if Tank Bigsby will be able to go in this game here or not for the Jaguars, like I mentioned, Chris. But lastly, just taking a look at the numbers for Travis Etienne against the Colts. The last 3 games, 86 rushing yards on 10 attempts. Last season, 18 rushing attempts for 77 yards. And then the second game, obviously being a divisional opponent, 18 attempts for 55 rushing yards for Travis Etienne. So at least over the last 3 games, he's gone up and over this number here. So I'll put faith in Travis Etienne to have a pretty big week this year, getting up and over this number of 51.5 here, Chris. So Travis Etienne over 51.5 rushing yards.
Yeah, I mean, you laid out all the numbers pretty perfectly here. If I think it's a big game for Travis Etienne as well. I got a player prop that I like in this game as well. So we'll talk about that one in just a second. But you mentioned it. I think, like I said, just the numbers they stick out a lot. And you mentioned Bigsby as well. Not sure if he's going to be able to play. I feel like typically when they get those back-to-back limited in practices, they typically end up being a go. But even if he is a go, how effective is he? So we could see an uptick for snap counts for Mr. Etienne as well. So yeah, I would be tailing you on this one here, and this is we got to talk about how bad the Indianapolis Colts defense is. We've kind of beat that dead horse a few times already with them giving up the most yards per game and the second most rushing yards. So like it.
All right, let's get over to our wide receiver props for week 3, or our next player prop here. Chris, what do you got?
Yeah, so we'll go same game. I like Brian Thomas Jr. in this spot here, wide receiver. That I think is going to have maybe a breakout game here in week number 5. You can get his receiving yards. I see 51.5 just on one book, so we'll go consensus with the 55.5. It feels like this number has ticked up just quite a bit already, but 55.5 is available on Bet365 as the consensus. Just 15 cent of juice you have to lay here. So looking at Mr. Thomas Jr. Back-to-back weeks, where he's really kind of developed some chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. 9 targets in back-to-back weeks. So he's over in 2 of the last 3 weeks, versus in the only undercoming against a really good Buffalo team where they kind of got steamrolled in that game on Monday Night Football. And you look at this Colts secondary, they have really, really struggled against opposing number 1 wide receivers. Not week 1, it was your guy, Nico Collins, 117 yards in that game. Week 2, 62 yards to Romeo Doubs. And that was with a backup quarterback in that game as well, because we remember that Jordan Love was hurt in game number 1 and didn't play in game 2. Week 3, a guy that came from out of nowhere, and maybe just building chemistry with his quarterback as well. Rome Odunze, 112 yards. And then last week it was George Pickens, 113 yards. So number 1 wide receivers just have been absolutely eating against this secondary. And I think that we see that continue here with Brian Thomas Jr. here. So I took Brian Thomas Jr. over 55.5 receiving yards, against a pretty poor secondary. And, also another desperate situation. Although Jacksonville covered last week against, who was that? Against you guys. They covered that, 6, I think it was. But, they didn't win. So you lose this one, you may start pulling some strings, and we may see some changes here. So no matter what those changes are, I do think we see Brian Thomas Jr. out there and absolutely feasting him, So I'll play him up and over 55.5 receiving yards here.
Yeah, he's been one of the more consistent receivers through the first 4 weeks for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know the last 2 weeks, Christian Kirk has had double-digit targets, but you take it to his first 2 weeks for Christian Kirk, it was not pretty for him. But the guy that has been consistent has been Brian Thomas Jr., who's had at least 47 receiving yards in each of the first 4 games. He had 94 against the Browns, and like you mentioned, he had 86 last week against the Texans. Back-to-back weeks where we had 9+ targets and for this Jacksonville Jaguars team. So I think that right now it seems like it's 1A and 1B with Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. I know they get Evan Ingram back this week, but we'll see how effective he is and how many snap counts that he does get. Want to be a little bit more careful with guys coming off of an injury here, for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So yeah, I couldn't talk you off of this one here, Chris. I mean, he's put money in pockets for sure for the early part of this season for his player prop at least. All right, for my last player prop, I'll give the square play out of the week. Stephon Diggs over 54.5 receiving yards going up against his former team. So revenge angle aside, and I'll get to the numbers here about the revenge angle. Stephon Diggs, we know that Nico Collins has been the man for this offense in this wide receiving group for the Houston Texans, right? Nico Collins right now, prior to last night, leading the league in receiving yards. And him and CJ Stroud had developed that chemistry last season, right? When number 1, Stephon Diggs wasn't there, and that was a rookie year for CJ Stroud. But back-to-back weeks, Stephon Diggs, he's been also getting the targets here as well. I know Tank Dell has been missing. They do get him back this week as well. But I just feel like because it is against his former team, and I think there may be a little bit more emphasis to get the ball to Stephon Diggs. Diggs is that slot guy for this Texans team. And I believe that the Bills are giving up the second most, I think it was either receptions or receiving yards in the middle of the field to that slot wide receiver position. And that's where Stephon Diggs is going to eat in this game. So the last 2 weeks overall for Stephon Diggs, 21 targets, 15 receptions, over 163 receiving yards, had 94 against the Minnesota Vikings, and then 69 last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, we know that Stephon Diggs used to play for the Minnesota Vikings. He's faced them 2 times since being traded from the Minnesota Vikings. One game was with the Buffalo Bills. Then earlier this season against the Vikings when he got traded over here to the Texans. In those 2 games, Chris, when he was with the Bills going up against his former team, the Vikings, 12 receptions, 128 yards. And this season, week 3 against the Vikings, Diggs, 10 receptions, 94 yards. So definitely clear this number. He said all the right things in the media this week that, he's just focused and locked in on just going 1-0 this week. But, we know that when you have a team that trades you away and things that are being said, that whether he was quote unquote a cancer in the locker room and all the drama / heated quote unquote conversation that we see on the sideline involving Stephon Diggs, I believe there's a bit of a pettiness to when it comes to Stephon Diggs here. And I think that he's going to stick it to his former team. So there may be a little bit of emphasis there to him to get him the ball early in this game here and often. So I'll go Stephon Diggs. Got this number at 53.5. It's up to 54.5. I like this all the way up to 60.5, 65.5. I do think that this is a big game here for Stephon Diggs here, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that you laid it out perfectly, but the other thing is, not that you just have to game plan for Stephon Diggs. You got a game plan for Nico Collins, right? I mean, this is the guy that has, absolutely been on an absolute tear. I know we talked about it off air on Monday, but what is he? Is he still leading the league? He's leading the league in receiving yards, right?
Yeah, I mean, prior to last night, Nico Collins was at 481 receiving yard, 489. But let me double check here while you talk about it. Yeah, he's still at 489.
489, yeah, and that's been the biggest problem is how to slow down that guy, not necessarily Stephon Diggs, and you may see a extra route or two in them, that Stephon Diggs is running, a little bit harder than he ran last week or the week prior to. So, sure he wants to stick it to his old team, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was able, if Tank Dell being back, kind of came on slow, and Stephon Diggs had a very, very big game, and they were trying to get him implemented in the game plan pretty early as well. So I like the look for Stephon Diggs to go up and over. Also like that, feels like we're getting it at a discounted price. It's not extremely high for Stephon Diggs in this spot. So I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, Nico Collins right now 489. The second guy on this list is going to be Chris Godwin, who played his 5th game last night at 386, and then Malik Neighbors, who's going to miss this week due to a concussion. He's also at 386. So Nico Collins right now has a lead of 103 plus receiving yards as the number 1 guy thus far this week. Thus far this season for leading the league in receiving yards. Your early part of the season. All right, before we get into honorable mentions here for the NFL Week 5 player props, let me tell everyone about our proud partners over at Rhythm. SGPN's proud partner, Rhythm, is the number 1 AI-powered back sports betting platform that helps provide bettors of all levels the ability to build custom models in seconds and get predictions for betting on money lines, spreads, totals, and props. Build your own model, copy one of the top performing models from the leaderboard, or press build a model. For me, and Rhythm gives you predictions for every game and player prop, and also has a myriad of stats, research, and trend analysis to give you even more betting insights. Claim your 7-day free trial by going to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/rhythm. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/RITHMM. And we're also brought to you by BetUS. Bet with the best in the business, BetUS. BetUS has been around for more than 30 years. Easily deposit cryptocurrency and get lightning fast payouts. US players are always welcome. Sign up and deposit $100 and have a chance to win a 1960 Ford Mustang. Use our link to sign up and get a 125% deposit bonus on your first 3 deposits. Go to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/BetUS. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/BetUS, promo code SGPN, so they know that we sent you. BetUS, America's favorite sportsbook. All right, Chris, let's get into some honorable mentions here for this week 5. Anything that you were looking at but couldn't quite get to the window with?
Yeah, let's go with back to where we talked about at the beginning. I'm looking at Zach Moss. We talked about how good that Baltimore Ravens defense is, and that game potentially being pretty one dimensional on the Cincinnati side of things. And Zach Moss is kind of sharing that backfield, of course, with Chase Brown. I think that's important to mention. And you got his rushing prop, or his rush attempt at 11.5 as well. This is a very similar number to what we talked about with Breece Hall, but Breece Hall sitting at 13.5. And I'm just not. I know he had a big week last week. He ran the ball 15 times against Carolina, but of course that's Carolina, which I got another look for for that game as well. But I'm of the mindset, that he doesn't get 12 carries here. It looks like on the season he's had back-to-back weeks of 12 carries against Kansas City and Washington. Washington also pretty soft defense against the rush, gave up 4.8 yards a carry to Mr. Zach Moss. So he's over in 3 games in a row, but the number is set a little bit lower, and I think it's set a little bit lower for a reason. So looking at Zach Moss rush attempts to go under, if I haven't pulled the trigger, wanted to get your thoughts on that one. Also, 2 more I want to throw at you real quick. Is Brock Purdy up and over his 1.5 passing touchdowns. He gets a beautiful matchup against the Arizona defense that's been absolutely been getting lit up, not just this season, but also, in the head-to-head matchup. I think when I went back and looked at it, Brock Purdy has a 3 passing touchdown game, and a 4 passing touchdown game against this same Carolina defense. We know that they're, bottom 5 in both the pass and the rush, and if they're going to have any success, it's going to be on the arm of Kyler Murray in their offense. So minus 145, it's a little juicy over there. If I think that they can find some success with Jordan Mason on the ground as well, but you can't give out Jordan Mason because he's minus 235 as the best odds. So I was looking for a double up with Jordan Mason because I feel like that it's the highest total on the board as well. I think it's 49.5, and it wouldn't surprise me if that game turned out to be a shootout in the form of San Francisco going over their team total. I'm not sure how much Arizona is going to contribute, but Jordan Mason minus 235. This is maybe a good parlay piece. If you can find, him to score 2, I like that one as well. I know it's in the same game. But going back to anytime, well, not anytime touchdowns. I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. Going back to Sunday props, honorable mentions. A look towards DeAndre Swift. His rushing prop, I think, is like 50.5 right now. Mm-hmm. And that number really stands out a lot to me because, looking at Swift, he was someone who, I've been kind of monitoring a lot lately and hasn't really found not too much success quite yet. This is a Chicago team that has really, really struggled to, move the ball consistently. Especially, with Alvin Caleb Williams out there at the quarterback position. But when I go through and I just look at his game log against that Rams defense last week, 16 rushes for 93 yards. And he placed the Colts defense on the road, I guess I should say, where he struggled as well. But the snap count is up 63% last week. And you just go through and, the big part of the handicap is Carolina's defense. I mean, they've been absolutely getting steamrolled here. They have given up at least 51 yards to at least one running back that they've faced throughout the season so far. Zach Moss, 51 last week. Chase Brown in the same game, 80. They did do a pretty good job against the Raiders, only giving Zamir White 34 yards. So I guess he's the only one that's going under so far. But Gus Edwards had 59 on 18 carries. J.K. Dobbins broke a couple explosives in that same game, 17 for 131 in week 2. And then it was Alvin Kamara, 83 on 15 rushes in week number 1 as well. So trying to find some way to play DeAndre Swift, thinking that he, of course, has a really good game with Chicago, needing another win. Their defense has been pretty good. I think they can slow down this Carolina offense, even with Dalton there. Just thinking that, a lot of their success will be on the back of DeAndre Swift this week, So DeAndre Swift over his rushing yards, Brock Purdy over his 1.5 passing touchdowns, and then Zach Moss under his 11.5 rushing attempts, for the 3 player props that I was looking at. Want your thoughts on those, and then anything you got that you were thinking that you quite didn't pull the trigger on yet either.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one the quick for Zach Moss, because I do like the under 41.5 rushing yards, because everything that we talked about with how good the rushing defense has been for the Ravens, right? Also the fact that you also have Chase Brown back there in that running back room for the Cincinnati Bengals. So they're really it's a two-headed horse back there for the Cincinnati Bengals. And again, also this could be a game script where they possibly are trailing in this game, and that they have to abandon the run game. But Moss is only averaging 3.9 yards per carry as well. So, and we've only had one running back that's gone over on his rushing yards in particular against the Baltimore Ravens, which was Isaiah Pacheco in the first week. It took him 15 carries to get 45. So I think there's a bit of a correlation here. So I would maybe think he gets 8 to 9 rush attempts here, and he doesn't have a big successful week on the ground here. So yeah, I couldn't talk you off of the attempts to go under or its rushing yards to go under in this game. Brock Purdy is the one guy that it's the matchup for him to get 2 passing touchdowns in this game is there because of what you mentioned against the Arizona Cardinals. The one area that's really had success has been the passing yards to go over. But again, getting those reinforcements back last week, getting another week of practice for those guys, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle are back for this team as well. So I think this is a good game, an opportunity for him to get 2 passing touchdowns, like you mentioned here. I know, like you mentioned, he had 7 passing touchdowns in 2 games over the course of his career against this Arizona Cardinals team, and how bad this Cardinals defense has been. I don't think that's been talked about. But I do think that there's an opportunity there for Brock Purdy. Couldn't talk you off of that. And I think the VIG kind of indicates that he should be able to get there against the Cardinals defense. And then the last one you mentioned was what was the last one you mentioned, Chris?
The DeAndre Swift?
Yeah, Swift. So Swift, I have him on fantasy team the first 2 weeks. Started him, didn't do anything. Benched him the 3rd week. After the Colts game, because we've talked a lot about that Colts rush defense that has not been very good. And then last week I benched him, and lo and behold, he has the game of the season. So maybe I think there's
16 carries for 93 yards last week,
and I think he scored a touchdown in there as well.
Yep, and a touchdown.
Yeah. So
also 7 receptions too, for 72 yards.
Just keep digging the knife deeper a little bit there, Chris. So maybe this was a game that, gets his confidence back last week. But when you have a rookie quarterback, you need to have an average or a slightly above average rushing attack. And I think that maybe last week, that's what really propels DeAndre Swift to get it going here a little bit in the matchup this week against the Panthers. Panthers rush defense, another team that's been struggling, right? We talked about the loss of Derek Brown, loss of Shaq Thompson also gone for the season now for that defense as well. So I think that they really need to get the running game going here for Caleb Williams to have success here. So couldn't talk you off of those, man. I'm just salty about DeAndre Swift, but again, that's a little bit biased on my part here. So I mean, this could maybe be a game coming off of last week that where we start seeing the wheels turn a little bit faster for DeAndre Swift. As far as mine, I'll make this quick. Everything that we talked about for the Minnesota Vikings rush defense, how good they've been, that would maybe have to have Aaron Rodgers throw the football a little bit more. But all 4 quarterbacks that they faced thus far this season have had to go up and over their pass attempts. 33.5 is the number right now for Aaron Rodgers. Daniel Jones had 42, Brock Purdy 36, 43 for CJ Stroud. And last week, 54. And we talked about how the Minnesota Vikings have been able to get out to leads. And that's really made opposing teams abandon the run and then having to throw the football there. So I know it's Aaron Rodgers. I think he's only gotten open over this number just once, which I believe was against the New England Patriots. That was one I was looking at. But other than that, Chris, I really didn't have anything else as far as honorable mention. There's still some props I was waiting for to drop here, but I mean, that was the only one I had for A-Rod. Did you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it correlates really, really well with my Bryce Hall under his 51.5 rushing yards, or the under on his 13.5 rush attempts. And you laid it out nicely, this Vikings defense is pinning their ears back, and they're forcing you to pass the ball because they're doing what you want. If I said, build me a defense, and what do you want your defense to do? You're going to say, Chris, I want my defense to stop the run so that there's no manipulation in play call, and we don't have to worry about play action, so that we can pin our ears back and make teams pass the football on passing downs, which are, second and longs, third and longs, right? Or third down most of the time in general anyway. So, yeah, you mentioned it. Opponents averaging 44 passing attempts per game. And I talked about this earlier, but you look at this Jets offense, they're already passing the game because Breece Hall has not, been what we thought he was going to be, especially coming off the year that he had last year. They're passing the ball 34 times per game anyway at the ninth highest rate. So that one makes a lot of sense to me. I think, especially if we think that even if there is or is not, I don't think game flow really, changes it too much here, because I don't see a Minnesota team kind of letting up off, being able to give up the run. And I mean, what else you going to do? Punt the ball? So, I mean, you got to pass it if you can't run it. So makes a lot of sense to me. I think I'm probably end up tailing you on that one, even though you haven't bet it yet.
All right, let's get over to touchdown scores for this week here, Chris. I'll lead off here. I'm gonna stay chalky. I'm gonna stay square. I'm gonna go Stephon Diggs plus 140 against his former team. But Stephon Diggs has also been able to find the end zone for this Texans team there, along with Nico Collins. But I think this is a week at plus 140. I'm single currently over on DraftKings, but like we always say, shop around, get the best number. So I do like him. Also, another revenge game. We didn't talk about it. DJ Moore going up against the Carolina Panthers this week. I know he hasn't really been able to get it going here as well, but I think there may be a possibility that he's able to find the end zone at plus 190. And then I think typically we're not going to see Tyreek Hill at plus odds, Chris. I know the quarterback situation there, but I think this is another week where they're able to figure it out a little bit for the Miami Dolphins, with Tyler Huntley having another week of practice under his belt with this Miami Dolphins offense. So I think that there's an opportunity for Tyreek Hill. And look, there were some passes last week that Tyler Huntley made that either were a little bit short or underthrown, or it was a tad bit overthrown. So I think that he'll be able to find that middle ground there with Tyreek Hill. So plus 185 I think that's a nice price. We're not going to see that again for a guy like Tyreek Hill. So I'll throw those three at you, Chris, as far as touchdown scores.
Yeah, it make a ton of sense. If I like that. While you were talking, it made me think about looking at Tyler Huntley. I know somebody talked about it on another show I was doing. Taking Tyler Huntley over his rushing yards, just because he's going to run the football, and I'm not at a mindset that this Patriots defense is last year's Patriots defense. So I'm thinking that he could potentially have some success on the ground as well. I see his rushing yards at 34.5. So I'm gonna write that one down, bookmark that, and come back to that one in just a few. But I like yours, They make a ton of sense. Guys, I was looking at here. I was looking at DK Metcalf against that Giants secondary. Yep. He continues just to have a stellar season. A little bit, he's overachieving in my opinion, just a little bit. But with a defense like this, I don't think I would kind of shy away from him, just yet. DK, I know he was limited in practice with a hand injury, but I don't know. DK back-to-back weeks with a touchdown outside of the Detroit game. He continues to play really, really well. You can get him at plus money. I think he's plus 140 on BetMGM.
Yep.
Jaden Daniels also, I think he finds a way to get into the end zone this week against the Browns defense that is really good against. I think the Browns slow down the Commanders offense. The Commanders are, on their high horse right now, back-to-back, really good wins. I think they punted the ball 4 times throughout the whole season, but I could see a game plan for the Browns where, they really focused on stopping the run. And what that'll do is force him to have to, Jaden Daniels, to have to pass the ball a little bit more. And that'll create the opportunities for him to use his legs to get into the end zone. So, RPO, where he keeps it himself, I can see him getting in, and you can get him at plus 140-ish odds as well. And those were a couple guys that really stood out to me, just I guess those couple guys, and maybe a George Kittle, just because we think Brock Purdy's going to have a really good game this week as well. I'll just go with those couple guys.
All right, Chris, let's wrap up the show here with our best bets for the NFL Week 5 card. Where are you taking us for your best bet?
We'll go Lamar. If I like Lamar over his 53.5 rushing yards. And the reason why is because we see a 2.5 point spread. We're thinking it's going to be a pretty competitive game. You got the defensive lineman coming back on the Cincinnati's front four, which I think will impact, like I said, Derrick Henry being able to have as much success as he's recently had. He won a couple fantasy football leagues for me by himself last week, So I'm thinking that they're going to slow him down just a tad bit, but Lamar will drop back and then end up using his legs, as we saw throughout. He's 4 for 4, like I said, in the last 4 meetings against Cincinnati. I'm expecting it to be a really close game. And I'll take Lamar up and over his 53.5 rushing yards. Hear me know if it's the best bet.
All right. For my best bet, I'm going to go Stephon Diggs, man. I'm going to keep this one simple, over 53.5 receiving yards. It's just a revenge angle as well. And I think that he's going to have success on in that middle of the field there where the Bills have struggled this season. You also have to contend with Nico Collins, who's been absolutely fantastic, but I think there'll be an emphasis here to get the ball to Stephon Diggs. So I'm going to go over 53.5 receiving yards for him as my best bet for NFL Week 5. All right, that's going to wrap it up here for this edition of the Propcast. Make sure you guys follow Chris over on the Twitter machine at ChrisBeCappinn. You can follow me there as well at SportsNerd824. And again, make sure if you haven't already subscribed to the Propcast over on YouTube, just go ahead and type that in and subscribe, and do us a favor, leave us a rating and review. All right, we'll be back next week for Thursday Night Football. Till then, good luck with your bets. Let's break these books off, and always remember to let it ride.